Lo que está diciendo el señor Rodríguez, de que la detención, Terry.
Who's Terry that he's talking about?
I think it's a police officer. But don't worry.
Appearing in court can be intimidating and overwhelming. It is intimidating enough when you speak the same language as everyone else in the court. But imagine if you spoke a foreign language and had to rely on somebody else to interpret what is being said. Inaccurate interpreting might prevent you from getting the help you need or from being released if you should be released. We want to familiarize you with mental illness proceedings so you can feel more comfortable doing your important job as an interpreter. The purpose of civil commitment hearings is generally to determine whether the state has proven that persons being detained, called respondents, have mental illnesses which cause them to be gravely disabled or to be a danger to themselves or to others. Based on the evidence presented at the hearing, the judge will decide whether the respondent should continue to be detained and treated, released to a less restrictive alternative, or completely released. Your job as an interpreter during these hearings is very important because you are the ears and the voice for the respondent. As people speak, you will need to interpret accurately so the respondent understands what is being said. Interpreting accurately does not permit you to add your own opinions, but requires that you interpret exactly what the person speaking says, even if you think it may be wrong. For instance, if a lawyer says, "Do you have blue apples in your yard?" you must interpret to the respondent in his or her native language, "Do you have blue apples in your yard?" You might think of yourself as a telephone connecting the court and the respondent. Whatever information is put in comes out without change, just in a different language. When you arrive at a hearing, the first thing that will usually be presented is the opening statements of the lawyers. The respondent will probably sit between you and his or her lawyer, so you can interpret for both of them without constantly turning your head. Here is an example of what the opening statements at a mental illness hearing might look like. During this scene, notice how the interpreter correctly addresses the judge rather than a lawyer or the respondent if the interpreter needs someone to slow down or has any questions. Also notice how the interpreter correctly refers to herself in the third person.
Morning, Your Honor. I'm Mary Perdue representing Mr. M, who is present in court. We're denying all three allegations in this case. I believe that the state's testimony will show that Mr. M was found at or near a bar and had some contact with an officer. He approached her. At some point, he called himself George Foreman and assumed a fighting stance. But then he moved away from her. Sometime later, he was found on Maple Valley Highway.
Your Honor, the interpreter cannot interpret as fast as Ms. Perdue is speaking. Can she please slow down?
Yes. Ms. Perdue, would you please slow down so that the interpreter can keep up with you?
He was then seen by the case manager from Mental Health Northwest. At one point, Mr. M made a fist and supposedly lunged at the case manager. However, he was in 5-point restraints at the time, lying flat on a gurney, and was unable to move his wrists. The evidence will also show that the case manager was far away from him at the time.
Your Honor, the interpreter is not familiar with the term 5-point restraint. Can you please have it clarified?
Yes. Ms. Perdue, could you clarify the term 5-point restraint for the interpreter?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. M was in 5-point restraints, which means restrained by both wrists and his ankles, with a strap along his waist as well. The evidence will show that he was far away from his case manager at the time. The evidence will also show that Mr. M is in a different state of mind now than he was at that time. He can care for himself now.
In that last scene, the interpreter did a good job asking the judge to have the attorney slow down so that she could keep up with the interpretation. Often, lawyers or judges will forget that you must interpret their words, and they will speak too quickly. During a hearing, you may need to ask the judge to have people speak more slowly and repeat the questions or answers. Never skip ahead to catch up. It would be easy to get frustrated and give up, but remember, your accurate interpretation will assure that justice is served. Another thing that you should have noticed is the interpreter interpreted everything in the first person rather than the third person. For example, when the attorney said, quote, "I believe that the testimony that the state will offer," the interpreter interpreted that exactly as spoken, saying to the respondent in his native language, quote, "I believe that the testimony that the state will offer." If you were to interpret everything into the third person, saying, for example, "He believes that the testimony that the state will offer," this would not only be confusing, but could change the meaning of what was said. During the hearing, you will not only be interpreting what the lawyers, respondent, and judge say, but you may be interpreting the testimony of witnesses. Witnesses could include police officers, various family members, or doctors. Civil commitment hearings often include references to various psychotropic medications or medical procedures. If a term comes up you are not familiar with, you will need to ask the judge to have it clarified so you can accurately interpret it to the respondent.
Doctor, what if he were to quit taking Haldol? How long would it take for him to return to his previous behavior?
Your Honor, the interpreter is not familiar with the term Haldol and needs to have it clarified.
Ms. Perdue, please define Haldol.
Yes, Your Honor, I'll rephrase the question so it can be interpreted accurately. What if he were to stop taking Haldol, which is a brand name for a psychiatric medication? How long would it take for his previous behavior to reoccur?
Actually, that can vary immensely, anywhere from a few days to several months.
The interpreter is sorry, Your Honor. The interpreter can't keep up. Can she shift to consecutive interpretation? And could Your Honor please ask the attorneys to pause to allow interpretation?
Certainly. In order to accommodate the interpreter's consecutive interpretation, you must pause for the interpreter. Please continue.
When Mr. M returned to the clinic, he had not been taking his medications for over 2 weeks. Is that correct?
當阿 M 生返去嗰個診所嘅時候，佢已經冇食藥超過2個禮拜啦，係咪啊？
Yes, that is correct according to our records.
根據我哋嘅記錄咧，係啱嘅。
Now, when Mr. M returned to the clinic, your notes state that he was smearing feces all over himself.
阿 M 生返去嗰個診所嘅時候，你筆記上面話佢要將啲屎抹對自己全身都係嘛？
Yes.
係。
Now, doctor, isn't it fair to say that...
I didn't do it. I never did.
Write it down.
I never did that.
Write it down.
寫低啊，叫你
Write
寫
it
低
down.，
寫低。
Thank you. Doctor, isn't it fair to say that sometimes clients do acting out behavior, like smearing feces, just to get attention?
醫生啊，你話咁樣講公唔公平啊？有時候啲病人特登係咁樣做咧，抹啲屎喺身上咧，就等你唔注意佢啊。
Generally, actually, I can't think of an instance when I've seen that behavior in a non-psychotic person. That kind of acting out is generally seen in acute psychosis.
Your Honor, the interpreter is not familiar with the term acute psychosis. Could Your Honor please have this clarified or allow the interpreter time to look up the term?
Ms. Perdue, can you please define the term acute psychosis?
Your Honor, I think to allow for an accurate interpretation, we should allow the interpreter time to look the term up.
我諗要俾呢個準確嘅翻譯嘅話，我哋必須要俾翻譯員嘅時間嚟到查一查個生字。
Please take the time now to look up the term. When you are ready, we will continue.
Thank you, Your Honor.
When you are interpreting for a mental commitment hearing, you may hear unfamiliar terms. You should bring an appropriate bilingual dictionary or glossary to the hearing if possible. The respondent may use vulgar language or speak in sentences that appear not to make sense. As with everything else in this hearing, it is important that all statements be interpreted accurately if possible. Even if the respondent says, "I am an alien from outer space," the statement must be interpreted accurately, even if the interpreter believes the statement is untrue. Likewise, if the respondent nonsensically answers a question by saying, "Fairy godmother's pizza flew away," This phrase must be interpreted accurately, even though it appears to make no sense.
Was there anything unusual about him when you saw him?
Yes. His pants were on inside out, and his zipper was completely undone, exposing his genitals.
When you saw this, did you say anything to the respondent?
I asked him to put his pants on the right way. When I asked him to do this, he began yelling at me. He said, "Fuck you, I'm Muhammad Ali and I can beat the shit out of you. Take off your gun and I'll kick your ass."
咁我叫佢咁做嘅時候咧，佢就開始大聲鬧我啦。佢話：屌你啊！我係亞利拳王，我打鬼死你都得。除咗張支槍咁，我就踢你個囉柚。多謝係啊，聽唔聽？
Your Honor, the interpreter cannot interpret both for the witness and the respondent. For which party does Your Honor wish the interpreter to interpret?
Please only interpret the testimony of the witness at this time.
Besides hearing things that you're not accustomed to, you may also see the respondent acting in ways that are not common in our society. Respondents have been known to spit, scream uncontrollably, defecate on themselves, expose themselves, shout, throw water, and mumble unintelligibly. Sometimes these behaviors may appear frightening to you, but remember, you will never knowingly be put into a dangerous situation. During the hearing, there is always a guard or attendant in the room. If a respondent has proven to be violent, he or she will be brought to the hearing in restraints. If you face a situation where you feel threatened by the respondent, make the judge aware of your concerns.
Mr. M., do you remember when the officer found you at the Buffalo Tavern?
M 生啊，你記唔記得嗰個警官喺嗰個北湖嗰個酒吧度揾到你啊？
係。
Yes.
There was testimony that at that time you stood up and said you were Muhammad Ali.
咁嗰陣有人作證話你就企起身話你係嗰個亞利拳王係嘛？
係。
Yes.
When you stood up and assumed the fighting stance, did you swing at the officer?
咁你企起身啦，準備想打交咁嘅姿勢啦，你有冇想打嗰個警官呢？
我去見上帝啊嘛！嗰個衰婆阻住我拯救呢個世界喎。
I was going to see Zeus, but that bitch was interfering with me saving the world.
做乜望住我啊？我殺咗你啊嗱！你行埋嚟，我連頭都擰甩你啊
Your Honor, the interpreter cannot interpret under these conditions.
We will move the interpreter and have additional staff security.
Your Honor, the interpreter cannot interpret because those are unintelligible noises.
You are not expected to interpret unintelligible noises. Please proceed.
A mental commitment hearing can be disturbing. The important thing for you to remember is that your job is to accurately interpret all that takes place during the proceedings. In order for the process to work effectively, you need to perform the following duties. Interpret all that is said in the courtroom accurately without adding or subtracting information. Present all information exactly as spoken. Quote, I said that Mr. M was running down the road naked, rather than, quote, he said that you were running down the road naked. If someone speaks too fast for you to accurately interpret, ask the judge to have him or her slow down. If someone uses a word or term that you do not understand, ask the judge to have the meaning clarified so you can accurately interpret it. Bring a bilingual dictionary or glossary with you to the hearing that translates your native language to English and vice versa. This will avoid delays and assure that difficult terms are communicated accurately. You must be familiar with and abide by the interpreter's code of conduct. If you do not already have a copy, ask for one now. You have seen several of the difficult problems that may come up for you during a mental illness proceeding. Usually, though, you should be able to interpret without interruption and disappear into the background of the hearing. This is an example of smooth interpretation. Notice that the interpreter simultaneously interprets without interrupting the proceedings.
Your Honor, at this time, we move to dismiss both remaining counts against my client, Mr. Mikhail Ivanov. It is clear from Mr. Ivanov's testimony that he did not mean any harm. He made no threats and he did not touch anyone. All he wanted was his $5, but he's willing to let that go. Mr. Ivanov is taking his medication on his own now, and he has a place to live. He has been living there for 4 years. He can bathe himself and feed himself. He has an income, and there has been no testimony to the contrary. Mr. Ivanov knows where he lives. And I would like to point out to the court that at the time this incident occurred, there was some discrepancy as to whether Mr. Ivanov acted erratically only because he had not taken his medication. We respectfully ask the court to consider releasing Mr. Ivanov so he can go home. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel. With regards to the motion to dismiss, the court will dismiss the count of harm to himself. We have no context, no time, no planning connecting him and the submarine he supposedly threatened to blow up. This was more of an idle threat than any specific plan to harm himself. However, the claim of harm to others should stand based on his threats to his uncle when he brandished the gun and said he would blow out the ceiling with it. He obviously made his uncle apprehensive. For that reason alone, if not others, the court will not dismiss the claim of harm to others.
You are a very important part of the process. The law requires that you neither omit nor add anything to the court proceedings in a well-intentioned effort to help. By interpreting all that happens during the hearing accurately, you will allow the court to reach a just result.